William Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, and we are but its players. And Dante called it the Divine Comedy. Others have called life a cosmic joke. Miracles refers to the ego's view as a collective delusional system. And I thought, yeah, it's the greatest show on earth. It's a show, it's a dream, it's a drama, it's a play. Greatest, you have to understand, we're the most widely subscribed to show on earth. Great in that sense. So, full of misconceptions and ancient beliefs, ancient fears that have been projected out onto the world. We're going to look at one of the major ones today in this session. Whoops, sorry. So we'll be reading about the meaning of the Last Judgment, the final judgment. This is an ancient idea which has attached to it millennia of fears and mythologies associated with it. So the Course, in attempting to undo these concepts of fear, offers the Holy Spirit's interpretation as an alternative. Welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader today is Atisha B.
One of the ways in which you can correct the magic miracle confusion is to remember that you did not create yourself. You are apt to forget this when you become egocentric, and this puts you in a position where a belief in magic is virtually inevitable. Your will to create was given you by your creator, who was expressing the same will in his creation. Since creative ability rests in the mind, everything you create is necessarily a matter of will. It also follows that whatever you alone make is real in your own sight, though not in the mind of God. This basic distinction leads directly into the real meaning of the Last Judgment.
So, in previous sessions, we were reading about the gift from the Creator to us, to the power to create, to use our willpower for creating a life of love. And we also identified that that willpower can be used in error, mistakenly, to miscreate and make illusions and idols seem real. So can go to it's a fork in the road, can go one of two ways. So that will to create is a God-given right. It's given to all humanity. And in fact, the creator was expressing his creative abilities in bringing creation into existence and then imparted that attribute to us. And so that ability rests in your mind, and therefore using your mind creatively to create along the lines of the laws of God, the laws of heaven, is a matter of will. Will combined with the power of your mind together produce a powerful force for good. However, that same power, whenever you alone and separately and of your lower self, whatever you miscreate by yourself, will seem real to your own mind, but not in the mind of God. I got to get my pointer going here, which often involves me doing, there it goes. But so you'll miscreate and it'll seem real to yourself, but not in the mind of God. Here we go. This is the basic distinction between when you use your mind to create for good or when you use your mind to miscreate in opposition or in contrast to the laws of God. And that will lead us, this basic distinction, into the real interpretation, the true understanding of the Last Judgment. So this is really a review, what we're saying here. It's a minor point, I think, in this section. Well, no, not actually. This will refer to this later on. So this is a difficult idea to understand, to remember that you did not create yourself. So let's go over the ego narrative that says it's up to you to decide what is the meaning of your life. It's up to you to decide who you are and why you're here. It's up to you to decide what the truth is. It's up to you to decide what love is. And in so doing, you formulate a self-concept which you alone and by yourself have made up. That's the idea of creating a self-image on your own, separately and independently from any input from the Holy Spirit or the Creator. And so that's a fundamental confusion about your identity. Are you the creator of your own identity, or do you have a source in the infinite that has created you and you are the effect of that creation? And that leads, depending on, again, it's a fork in the road, depending on which path you choose. Many ripple effects will occur depending on how you decide whether you create yourself or acknowledge the creator as your source. So, to circle back then to this basic distinction between what you decide is true by yourself, this is by your lower mind, your ego mind, will seem real to you, though it is not real in the mind of God. And learning to make that distinction is the primary task of the Holy Spirit, to help you to see the difference between the truth, that which is true, and that which is false. You might think that you could do that on your own, that you could figure out the difference between light and darkness or love and fear. But the ego has its own agenda, and it's to confuse those things and try to suggest compromises and flip everything upside down so that you are unable to distinguish light from darkness, love from fear. And therefore, the Holy Spirit works with that primary fundamental error and giving you the ability to distinguish and thus choose again. So what we'll do today is learn to choose again regarding the true meaning of the Last Judgment. We'll go on.
The Last Judgment is one of the most threatening ideas in your thinking. This is because you do not understand it. Judgment is not an attribute of God. It was brought into being only after the separation, when it became one of the many learning devices to be built into the overall plan. Just as the separation occurred over millions of years, the Last Judgment will extend over a similarly long period, and perhaps an even longer one. Its length, however, can be greatly shortened by miracles, the device for shortening but not abolishing time. If a sufficient number become truly miracle-minded, this shortening process can be virtually immeasurable. It is essential, however, that you free yourself from fear quickly, because you must emerge from the conflict if you are to bring peace to other minds.
Let's address the latter portion of this statement first. We're talking about a transition from a world premised on fear and judgment to a world of forgiveness and innocence and peace. That transition can take long periods of time, even millions of years. We're talking about throughout the cosmos, all the worlds in existence can take millions of years. But that transition can be shortened by miracles. Miracles are intended to shorten the amount of time it takes to learn that the truth is true. And so this next line really speaks to me on this world. If a sufficient number of people become truly miracle-minded, the shortening process can be virtually immeasurable, which is to say, miracle workers can usher in a new spiritual age. If a sufficient number of people become truly miracle-minded, it doesn't mean they just carry around A Course in Miracles or they say the words. It means that their minds are transformed and empowered by the principles of miracles, truly miracle-minded. The shortening process can be virtually immeasurable. And as you know, we talked about this in our opening series in January. It's essential first that you free yourself from fear quickly, because until each individual emerges from the conflicts between creation and miscreation, you really can't help to free others and bring peace to others while you're still in the midst of the battle yourself. So this is, I think, a call to arms. This is how we move into the next dispensation on our world, is to a sufficient number to become truly miracle-minded. And I'll go off topic a minute outside of Course in Miracles, but in social theory, they have found 5 to 10% of the population, if you shift the viewpoint and the orientation of 5 to 10% of the people, that carries the majority into a new direction. For in other words, it doesn't say that if all the people of our world become truly miracle-minded, just a sufficient number, and it doesn't say what number that would be. But in social theory, we know that global change or national change can come about with 5 to 10% of the people. And that's all. I have more to say on that, but I'll limit myself in this context here. But it's exciting possibilities, because we may be nearing 1% already. All right, so all that was off the record. So now let's go back to the last judgment. These are the things. It's essential you free yourself from fear quickly in order to help bring peace to other minds. Well, one of the greatest fears of all time is the last judgment, the final judgment, the judgment of God. And this is an ancient fear. It's been interpreted that way, as an ancient fear, the most threatening idea in your thinking, because it's misunderstood. It has, in fact, nothing to do with God. It was attributed to God, yes, But in truth, judgment doesn't flow from God. He's not in that business. As a matter of fact, judgment came about as a attribute or an offspring of the separation. So there you go, understanding where did judgment come from? Well, first the separation happened, and then judgment started to flow. And so that process, we are in the middle of it from a cosmic perspective, from a planetary mode. We're in the middle of all this judgment culture, but the shift out of that can change and can be greatly shortened if a sufficient number of people become miracle minded by freeing themselves from fear and then helping to bring peace to other minds. So we haven't said yet what the last judgment is, but we've motivated, hopefully, you to understand why we want to free ourselves from this ancient fear of the last judgment. Again, which has nothing to do with God himself. We'll go on.
The last, oh,
Go ahead.
the last judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken by my brothers with my help. It is a final healing rather than a meting out of punishment, however much you may think that punishment is deserved. Punishment is a concept totally opposed to right-mindedness, and the aim of the last judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you. The last judgment might be called a process of right evaluation. It simply means that everyone will finally come to understand what is worthy and what is not. After this, the ability to choose can be directed rationally. Until this distinction is made, however, the vacillations between free and imprisoned will cannot but continue.
Free and imprisoned will. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into it then about the last judgment. As we said, it does not come from God, but it does have to do with the culmination of a process within humanity, a process which Christ's vision contributes to. It can be viewed as an end stage to the healing process. The last judgment is clearly an end stage phenomenon. It has nothing to do with punishment, but it does have to do with healing. It has to do with the restoration of your consciousness to the memory of God. It has to do with right-mindedness. It has to do with shifting from upside down thinking to right side up thinking. It has to do with no longer using your mind to miscreate along the lines of the ego, and instead mastering the ability to use the power of your mind to bring about healing and peace and love. And so it's a wonderful celebration. It's of the culmination of the final healing. And we call it a process of right evaluation. We'll explore the meaning of that. So again, to make a distinction between, we're talking about your life right here on earth, between what really matters, what has worth, versus what really doesn't matter, what has no worth. And you'd think that would be an easy thing for you or I to figure out on our own. But it's rather obvious that people put a great deal of effort into things that have no worth at all, have no lasting value. And so the last judgment is a where we finally come to that final healing where it's clear, where we understand in our own conscious mind, we're no longer struggle, no longer have no ability on our own to tell, but we become clear minded. This is through Christ's vision. We can see clearly, and here I'll add my own interpretations. Your holy brothers have great worth. Everything else is details, is just trivial. But the light within the soul of each individual has eternal worth, eternal meaning, eternal value. And of course, that can be expressed in many ways as well. All the other things can be seen as either reflections of the light, and if they're not reflecting the light, then they have no lasting worth. And then a fascinating statement is made is that after you've come to understand what it has worth, then you will have the ability to choose rationally. You know, this is spiritual reason. You have the ability to confronting situations which are ordinary situations even today, and being able to use spiritual reason to navigate through those situations. Whereas without the ability to understand what is worthy, and without spiritual reason, it can be very challenging, as we all know, to navigate through a situation and know what to do. Holy Spirit, help me. I have no idea what would be best here. Until we develop this ability to choose what is worthy, and our mind can be directed rationally, the mind will vacillate. Remember this word. I use the word oscillate also. Ping pong, pendulum swinging. The mind will vacillate back and forth between using its power, sometimes to create along the lines of laws of heaven, but then forget and get distracted and believe in illusions, and then using the mind to miscreate. That is a phenomena that all miracle students go through. I think it's unavoidable. It implies it here until we can make this distinction between the worthy and unworthy. Vacillation from pre and frozen will cannot but continue. And many miracle students, myself included, get very frustrated. Is that the word I want? Down on themselves because they haven't mastered the process yet. And they know that they're in a state of miscreation. They know this can't be peace and love that we're doing, but they do it anyway. Well, that's implied here as a lack of the ability to choose rationally, which comes from not understanding where true value lies. In other words, seeing things upside down, valuing the illusion rather than valuing the light and eternal truth. So it's a process. Okay, so the final judgment is the conclusion of that process, And from there on, everything is easier. Everything is clear in the mind. The mind understands what is valuable and what is not. The mind can choose rationally. The mind can consistently remain as free will and use it for creating along the lines of heaven. Okay, but we haven't looked at the negative side yet.
The first step toward freedom involves a sorting out of the false from the true. This is a process of separation in the constructive sense and reflects the true meaning of the apocalypse. Everyone will ultimately look upon his own creations and choose to preserve only what is good, just as God himself looked upon what he had created and knew that it was good. At this point, the mind can begin to look with love on its own creations because of their worthiness. At the same time, the mind will inevitably disown its miscreations, which, without belief, will no longer exist.
Mm-hmm. So I know that many of us have read these words before and then maybe go on into the next paragraph without fully absorbing them. That's why we take our time here in this series to try to understand it. So remember, this is the first step towards freedom, is to distinguish illusions from the truth. That which is truth, that which is truth is true. That which is false is false. But with the ego as your guide, you would never know which one is which. Matter of fact, it gets flipped and upside down. So we need to learn, we need to be taught. And this involves using denial, the true proper use of denial to deny the illusion. And this is thoughts and feelings that arise, to deny their power to choose for you, that you have the power to choose for yourself. And so there's a reference here to the apocalypse. And again, a term in its ancient meaning that might be feared widely. You can view all the end of the world, apocalypse, but this is being reinterpreted here now to be the end of a great lie, the end of the belief that illusions have power over you, the end of the belief that fear comes from reality, from the world itself. And so it's a freeing process. Again, it's the final stage of healing. So everyone will ultimately, in the end stage, look upon his own creations and choose to preserve only what is good. So we have to talk about your own creations for a minute. It's not defined here, but it is defined elsewhere. And it has to do with your soul. Your soul has already in life had moments where you were aligned with the truth, where you loved the person you were with, where you were kind and good and aligned with Holy Spirit direction. You might not recall all those moments, but when those experiences happen, the Holy Spirit guarantees that she will never forget them. They become permanent parts of your soul's experience. Your conscious mind may drift back into the distractions of the world, but the Holy Spirit remembers it forever, and they become part of your creations. And the Course assures us that those soulful experiences with truth and light and love are eternal. They are forever a part of your experience. Those are your creations. These are the things that make you lovable in terms of, I'm talking about in terms of experience now. These are the things that you will look back on when the mind becomes perfectly clear, that you'll look back on those experiences and love that you had those experiences. So you will learn to look with love on your own creations because of their worthiness. So this end state is where you preserve only what is good in your mind. Now here's the other flip side. What about all the parts of our experience that were tragic or sad or painful? You will learn to look on your creations and choose to preserve only what is good. And those things which were not, you'll disown your miscreations, which by disowning them, you withdraw your faith and belief from them. They have no meaning. And many of you have already experienced this yourself in your own life, where certain experiences that used to seem central to your identity, you no longer invest in them, and they're like forgotten. They no longer mean anything. And so, and the Holy Spirit is the guide in this process of helping you to sort out what is true from what is false. For the ego cannot be a true guide in this matter. The ego is deceptive. Okay, so the final stage here is the ability to look on all of your own creations, your soulful creations, with love, and no longer take any interest, no guilt, no regrets, no suffering, no pain due to the events of the past, which will merely be looked upon as learning experiences. We'll go on.
The term last judgment is frightening, not only because it has been projected onto God, but also because of the association of last with death. This is an outstanding example of upside-down perception. If the meaning of the last judgment is objectively examined, it is quite apparent that it is really the doorway to life. I'm sorry. No one who lives in fear is really alive.
Wow, that last statement is pretty bold. We'll have to talk about that, but let's view the first thing. So we've said already that judgment is not an attribute of God, and that's the why. But the belief that it was God. Okay, so I'll try to paint out what I understood. Sometime after you die, your soul rises into some kind of place, and there's God on the throne, and he's got a record of everything that you've done wrong. And you're held accountable for all your past, and my soul is going to be judged by all my infractions of the laws of God. This was my view of the Last Judgment, and I believe this was some version of that is widely held. And it's a frightening thing that all the mistakes that I made, that you made, that are going to be recorded and we're going to have to pay the bad karma. We're going to have to pay the price for this. And now we're learning that it has nothing to do with God, because it's the association with death is what made it frightening in part. This is all upside down perception. In truth, the last judgment is the final step to healing. It's the entryway into perfect freedom. Remember, we said a moment ago, prior to this, the mind gets ping ponged and vacillates back and forth between being used for good purposes, well intended, aligned with the Holy Spirit purposes, and then losing sight. The unwatched mind cannot do anything well, and then it veers off into miscreation. And so after the last judgment, we enter through a doorway where all our miscreations no longer mean anything, and only our soulful creations are greeted with love. And that brings us to this statement: no one who lives in fear is really alive. And again, don't be level confused. We're not talking about biological life, because we're talking about being truly alive with love and light and peace and happiness. To be truly alive, well, fear covers that part of your mind in a blanket, a cloud, a dark cloud that prevents you from regularly experiencing tranquility and peace and soul and connection and love for others, meaning genuine love for others, and prevents us from being really alive. It's a very bold statement. I know my mind resisted that statement at first, but I've come to accept it as true. Susie?
I'm not sure this really fits, but it just seems really fitting to me. Last Monday night, we had a fundraiser at our home. We had a October 7th survivor come to our home and speak to about 60 people. And she was one of the survivors that hid under many dead bodies for 8 hours until she was rescued. And she shared with us, and it just reminded me of the statement in the beginning of the book that only love is real. She said that, I mean, she obviously had to use all kinds of survival. Yeah, her body just went into survival mode. And one of them was that she said she saw her entire life in front, come in front of her, and it was all wonderful things. Her happy childhood, the love of her parents, the love of her siblings, all the love and happy things in her life. And although there was so much to fear in this world, or whatever was going on with her uncle was killed in front of her, her 4 cousins, she really kind of shared that she wasn't living in fear. I mean, I know it's body and whatever, but that something came over her where she only saw the love that had happened in her life. And I thought that was really profound. And it just was so ACIM to me, and like almost like proof that when you're near death, or even when your mind thinks it's near death, or I don't really know how to explain it, but this is what she experienced.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just wanted to share that because that's what's coming up in my mind.
Mhm.
Can I add 2 points of clarification? Number one, she didn't hide under dead bodies. She was in a bomb shelter with 50 other live people who were all systematically murdered over a course of 8 hours. And she burrowed underneath those bodies to only way that she was protected from the bullets and the hand grenades and everything that were thrown in. So people were physically dying all over her, literally. Um, Number two, she did mention that there was some kind of a smoke bomb of some sort, and she had to protect herself and bring some kind of cloth or something over her face and mouth. And she felt like she was asphyxiating. And during that time is when the image of her life passed in front of her, and it was only blessed memories. So I didn't mean to, what Susie said was absolutely right on, but I was to add those points.
Mhm. Wow, that really is profound. I don't want to pretend to explain what her experience was like, but I do comment that clearly we're talking about someone, we'll call it on the brink of death, right there on the edge. Death is in the air. And people often have what would be psychologically a collapse of meaning. Nothing means anything. How your makeup looks that day has no meaning at all. Just being alive is the only thing that seems, and the people that you love, your heart goes out to that. But all the superficial things, like, oh, my clothes, just right, and is the car clean, shiny, all that collapses. And so I'm not trying to explain her experience. I'm just saying there's a sorting out process of that which really has meaning and worth, and that which does not. And what Susie testified was that she had an experience where all the things that she loves the most came to mind, and all the things that don't matter at all, like my bank account, or I don't know, whatever, no longer receives attention. The mind, and it's amazing because this happens a lot in the dying process and in grief work when people are right there on the edge of death, both for the family members and the individual as well. It narrows one's focus to the things that really matter. And what the Course is suggesting is that we go through that process without necessarily approaching physical death. And this is why people have described it. Christoph described it on a meeting about a year ago. He says, it feels like part of me is dying. It feels like I'm shedding part of myself that is the part that I knew is going away. It no longer has any meaning. And this is sometimes labeled as an existential crisis because it feels like your old former self, as you understood yourself, is dying. And what am I to become? So that is a doorway into sorting out the false from the true and finding out what really matters, your own creations, and then putting less attention disowning the miscreations, the things that really don't matter, no longer receive the amount of attention that they did before. And so that is a powerful learning experience. I'm sure the sharing of her experience moved everybody in the room. It's interesting that we would suggest psychologically and spiritually that you be open to that experience in your own context. Obviously, it's a very different context than what she went through. And no one would want anyone to have to go through what she did. So this is a dying to your old self as a doorway to your true self, reawakening to your true self, but doing so not in the context of fear, but in the context of using your free will choice. It's really, what comes to mind is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Again, in the context of Nazi prison camps and death is in the air, he found that those individuals who had a will to meaning, a will to live, survived, and those people that gave up and had no meaning did not. And he developed logotherapy out of that. I think there's not a widespread understanding of this process in our world, but it has been written about and it can be understood. It seems, yeah, I'm going to shut up, stop yapping here. Okay, any other sharing on that? Okay, we'll go on. Finish up here.
Your own last judgment cannot be directed toward yourself because you are not your own creation. You can, however, apply it meaningfully and at any time to everything you have made and retain in your memory only what is creative and good. This is what your right-mindedness cannot but dictate. The purpose of time is solely to give you time to achieve this judgment. It is your own perfect judgment of your own perfect creations. When everything you retain is lovable, there is no reason for fear to remain with you. This is your part in the atonement.
So this really is the concluding remarks, and I think where it really becomes clear what the true meaning of the Last Judgment is. And in the frightening ancient view of it, as I was explaining it, the fear was that you were going to have to come before God and give account for all your faults. It was about you. It was all about oneself and looking at all your faults. That was the ancient meaning. In this new interpretation, it's not directed towards you at all. It's not about you, because the false self that was created in time is not a lasting self. It's not a true self. And all the effects of the false self are but passing illusions. And so there's really nothing there to grab onto, but you can apply the Last Judgment meaningfully and at any time. Oh, I missed that. You can, however, apply it, which is your own last judgment, at any time to everything you have made, which is ego making, miscreating, and retain in your memory only what is creative and good. So this is really interesting. And I have to apologize because I often thought of the last judgment as the end of the journey, not a mid journey, but I get it. It's not governed by time. It has nothing to do with time. It does have to do with the conditions. You have to overcome fear and willingly choose to use your free willpower. But it's not time based. It's not going to be in 1,000 years from now or 100 years. It's whatever time when you're ready, you can apply it to your own miscreations and choose to retain only what is creative and good. This is what right-mindedness is about. It's an orientation of your consciousness away from the past, the ego, the laws of time. And toward the Holy Spirit's guidance, towards that which is of worth and lovable, and using your mind consistent with the laws of healing. This is what right-mindedness cannot but help dictate. And then it makes this all-encompassing statement. This is what time is for, is to be able to give you the opportunity to achieve this judgment of choosing to retain in your mind only what is creative and good. So let me pause here and take a comment. Heather?
Yeah, I'm just what we just read. Retain in your memory only what is creative and good. That's what this woman that Susie and David were talking about did.
Yes.
That's exactly what she did right here. It's unbelievable.
Thank you for pointing that out, Heather, to linking that to the sharing that Susie had, because there's an example. She might not have, what was she doing in the month before that? We don't know if she was on a spiritual path or, where she was on her path. Yes, she was on a spiritual path. We don't know the details, but that shocking situation fostered a moment in her where the only thing mattered was that which she loved at the most. And so it can be, the last judgment can be meaningfully applied at any time. And she was choosing, as you said, Heather, to focus on that which is creative and good. She was in her right, amazingly, under the physical circumstances. She entered into her right. But it should be said, well, I don't know. So she was in her right-mindedness, and this was so. We're wrapping up here. Actually, in a way, we're just beginning the conversation. This is the end of the reading, but this is not the end of the story. We're talking about what is the last judgment, the real meaning of the last judgment. It's your own perfect judgment of everything that you've experienced in your life that has light and meaning and love and worth. It's what the woman did. It's viewing through a lens of that which has worth, and each of us will have our time, our day and time, when everything you retain is lovable. Well, when everything you retain is lovable, there's nothing that's unlovable. There's nothing that's guilty or bad. Then there's no reason for fear to remain with you. And amazingly, you could say that we all are here on earth for this purpose. This is our part in the atonement, is to reach that moment where we look upon our lives, our own soul, and see only love. I do have to point out the counter side of that is the ego wants to block you from having this experience. And the ego wants to carry guilt forward and cloud any experience you might have with this moment so that when you look upon yourself, you over focus on that with regrets and guilts and judgments. The ego is attempting to postpone, delay this moment from happening. This is why sometimes it happens in a crisis, because it creates an environment in which we break through the illusions of the ego. And so just know that this is what the purpose of time is, to give us time to reach this state of final healing where there's no reason for fear to remain. This is why we're here. This is our part. This is your contribution to the infinite cosmic jigsaw puzzle we call life. Susie?
Yeah, so that's why we're in mind training, right?
Yeah.
To deny the ego and to know and to understand our thinking's upside down. And, that's why we have 365 lessons and we keep coming back and going over and over and over again. And I just keep going back to the beginning of the text that only love is real and what is all encompassing can have no opposite. And when she said that, I nudged, David, and I said, you see, only love is real. Like, I don't know, it was pretty profound. And so everything else is of the ego. And like, I don't know, it's, yeah, it's very understandable to me. Of course, my ego wants me to be in fear. And the purpose of time is for me to heal. So anyway, it makes total sense to me. What didn't used to make sense makes total sense. I'm grateful for that because I think it said something in the beginning about we may not understand, but we will. Mm-hmm. Keep doing it.
And Susie, when you first introduced, before you told the story, you said you don't know if this is going to fit. What a perfect fit for what we're talking about, illustrating someone in a crisis going through it, but then realizing that each of us eventually will have our day where she had a remarkable spiritual vision there of seeing all of the things that she loves. Each of us will have our day when we have our own perfect judgment of our own perfect creations. And so the course is intended to accelerate the amount of time it takes for you to have that experience, to collapse the time so we don't wait till many people have this experience in hospice in the last day of their earth life, where nothing else matters than the things that they love the most. So the course is intended not to bring us to the brink of physical death, but to bring us to that turning point in perception where that which is meaningless and has no lasting value, the idols and illusions of our past, are gladly and willingly released, making room for our conscious mind to no longer be split between the higher and lower, but for our conscious mind to be fully in love with life and in love with our creations and be delighted to share that with others. That is a turning point in perception, and it's not new. It's been experienced by other beings already. So the Holy Spirit has the map, the training plan for it to occur, and is eager to guide each of us along on our own journey. Let me invite you. So today's was about the Last Judgment, ancient epical belief system related to fear. In our next session, we're going to cover another topic that has to do with an ancient belief system, and that would be to be at one, atonement, be at one with creation without having to pay a price, without having to make a sacrifice in order to win favor of God, without having to give up those things which are meaningful in order to win the favor with Creator. We'll cover that in our next session. That's the beginning of chapter 3. So I want to thank you all. These are profound readings that we're doing here, and I'm so glad that we're on this journey together. Thank you for your attention. Atisha, thank you for your fine reading, and we'll look forward to connecting again next week or next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks, Atisha. See you tomorrow.
Peace and love.